Well, we're in that time of year again, where the world around us is all into celebrating Christmas. And I just always dread this time of the year and be glad when it passes by. But something you see around a lot in this time of the year are nativity scenes. You see them in stores. Sometimes people will have them out in their front yards. And sometimes they show three wise men. So in that reference that they use for that display comes from Matthew 2, verse 1. Just go ahead and turn there. That'll be the area that I'll be looking at mainly today. Matthew 2, verse 1. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him. So we see here these wise men came from somewhere east of Jerusalem, and they came to worship the new king, the King of the Jews, that they had heard about in prophecy. So the question I'm going to attempt to answer today is, who were these wise men who came from the east? This is the only chapter in the Bible that they're mentioned. They're not in any of the other synoptic gospels. Matthew wrote primarily to the Jews, according to the introduction I've read on it, and I've read that other places. And then, are there any lessons? What lessons can we learn from their appearance? And I've entitled this, Who Were the Wise Men of Matthew 2? Well, wise men comes from the Greek word magos, M-A-G-O-S, which is G3097 in the Strong's Concordance. And Strong's says the etymology of that is it's someone of foreign origin. And the Babylonians used the term to refer to many different type of occupations. It says refer to wise men, teachers, priests, physicians, astrologers, seers, interpreters of dreams, soothsayers, and sorcerers. So there's some of those are positive positions, and others are condemned in Scripture, the ones that practice sorcery. So in some translations, call it magi, which ties back to magic and things of that nature. One reference in the New Testament where it talks about a sorcerer, and it uses this term, is in Acts 13:6. We won't turn there. And this was a Jewish sorcerer who was called a false prophet, Bar Jesus, also called Elymas in verse 8 of Acts 13. So these came from the east. These men came from the east. And so it was an area east of Jerusalem. Again, we don't know for sure, but they believe they came from ancient Parthia. Parthia was a large empire that was to the east of Jerusalem. And this was the part of the world where the 10 tribes were taken when they went into captivity, were conquered by the Assyrians. And so this was way over into the east. This could have been anywhere where they started out from, could have been anywhere from 600 to 1,600 miles, is most of the references I looked at. So it was a long distance from Jerusalem. And this was a large caravan, and I'll go into more detail about that they were a large contingent, and probably took them 2 to 3 months to make the journey. And one thing that we know that the nativity scenes aren't accurate is that by the time they came and saw the child, he was called a child. He was no longer called a babe in the manger. So it says on down here in Matthew 2, verse 11, and when they had come into the house, they saw the young child. So he was no longer a baby at the time that the wise men came. But then the second question comes to mind is, why were these men from so far away interested in a baby born that far away? Most references say these were Gentiles. These were Gentiles. There's a man that's related to the Church of God over the years. His name's Stephen Collins. He lives in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And I called my friend that lives there, Terry Knutson, and I said, "Do you know Steve Collins?" He said, "Oh yeah, he comes and visits United occasionally." But anyway, he's done a lot of research into ancient history and written some books. And he wrote one on Parthia. It's called Parthia, the Forgotten Ancient Superpower and Its Role in Biblical History. And in this, this is all speculation. These are things you can't verify. He speculates that this could have been made up of 10 leaders from the 10 tribes of Israel, since they had been taken there and would have been descendants from those that were taken into captivity. And he said there may have actually could have been 12, because there were also Jews and Benjamites that had been taken captivity and later on also into that part of the world. And so he speculated there could have been 12, actually, not just 3. The 3 goes back to the 3 gifts, the myrrh, frankincense, and gold. But there was undoubtedly more than 3 wise men, as they usually have. But anyway, this connection, this was something I hadn't really looked into before, that this was why they had this strong attraction, this calling, is because they identified with Israel, with Jerusalem, because that's where they had originated from. This would be a good explanation of why they wanted to worship this child that had been prophesied. It says they were led by a star, so they were astrologers. They had seen a star, but I don't believe it was a star possibly way up in space, because it says this star took them right to where Christ was in Bethlehem. So it speaks of angels being stars, and that was more than likely was some type of an angel that led them on that journey and fulfilled those prophecies about the star. Another history of the time is that the Parthians and the Romans were battling back and forth for that where Jerusalem was located. And about 40 to 50 years before Christ was born, the Parthians had actually controlled Jerusalem. Herod, who had been appointed by the Romans, had to leave Jerusalem for a period of time. The Romans subsequently took it back. And so you can see why he was concerned, all these Parthians coming into town. This was a little threatening to him. And then his title was King of the Jews. And here they said they were coming to find the King of the Jews. So this was see why it was a threat to him. So what can we learn? Well, as we said, these wise men were drawn by a star. They knew the prophecies of the Old Testament. And so they must have been trained, very knowledgeable of these things. One prophet that has a messianic predictions, Numbers 24, verse 17. Numbers 24, verse 17. Just the first part of that, it says, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob. A scepter shall rise out of Israel. And that's considered a messianic prophecy that was fulfilled by these wise men coming. So they all not only knew this, but it was strong enough information and belief that they acted on it. They took action. According to Steve Collins' book on Parthia, this was a very large caravan. This wasn't just 3 guys coming in with a little bag of treasure with them. But this was something far bigger than that. They were bringing gold, incense, and myrrh, which had to be guarded as they passed through dangerous territory. So again, you can see that it would have been very obvious that they were there. To quote from the book, it says, "The Magi's caravan would have included large numbers of servants, animal handlers, cooks, etc., for such a long journey. These people alone would have constituted many hundreds of people. Given the fact that many high Parthian officials and very expensive treasures were in the caravan, there may have been thousands of Parthian soldiers escorting the caravan." Yeah, I never had that image until I read this, that this could have been a huge crowd coming in. And it was a big ordeal to put that together, all of the provisions to make that long a journey. It was a major, major operation. Robert Weber wrote an article in 2007, says, "Wise men still seek his star." And he brought out that these men acted in faith and followed God's lead. They went from knowledge to action. They brought gifts worthy of a king, and they followed a bright star that announced the coming of the Messiah, that announced that first coming, the first coming of the Messiah. He came as a baby and went through the whole human experience, from babyhood to the time he was crucified and then was resurrected. But if there's a first coming, there has to be a second coming. Are we ready to follow the star for the second coming? If you turn to Revelation 2, you'll see Christ spoken of as a star also. So that angels sometimes are mentioned as stars. Revelation 2, verse 28. Start in verse 27. "He shall rule them with a rod of iron. They shall be dashed to pieces like the potter's vessels. I also have received, as I have also received from my Father, and I will give them the morning star." And then back to the end of Revelation, Revelation 22:16, speaks of this morning star. Revelation 22, again, this is a quotation from Christ. "I, Jesus, have sent my angel to testify to you these things in the churches. I am the root and the offspring of David, the bright and morning star." So we must continue to follow that star until the second coming of Christ. In conclusion, we see that the wise men went to great trouble and expense to travel for several weeks with a great contingency, and were diligent to find the child who gave up his place in heaven to come to earth as a newborn baby. May we have the same dedication to continue to follow the star of Christ, to be part of his coming kingdom when he returns.